we're waking up every day going to a campus where we don't feel wanted. We have people claiming that they want to purge us and kill us. And it's like, how can you focus in that type of environment?
Harken back to a time in the 1960s when American college campuses were full of wide-eyed young people who truly sought substantive change in America. In many cases, succeeded in opening this nation's eyes to a number of issues that needed attention. Flash forward to this stage of the 21st century. College campuses once again ground zero for a social issue gripping America. It's once again an element of racism. Only this time there are more than a few watching the proceedings and questioning if things are really as bad as some would indicate. And if it proves college students are chasing the right issues, but maybe in the wrong manner. First up, research fellow for the Heartland Institute and managing editor at the Federalist, Joy Pullmann, joined by a counseling psychologist with Emergence Psychological Services and a graduate of the University of Missouri, Dr. Jameca Falconer. Ladies, I want to thank you both for joining us. And Dr. Falconer, seeing as you went to the University of Missouri, let me begin with you. The soundbite we heard coming in was someone talking about people at the university want to purge us, want to kill us. And we have heard people talk about systemic racism at Missouri over the years. Have you personally experienced any of that?
Well, you know, for me, my experience is a little bit different. And I was there in the late 90s, early 2000s. And for me, I didn't experience any direct instances of racism or discrimination, but I've heard many stories over the years of other people that have. So I'm thankful in that way. But I think that the climate has been somewhat different over the past few years. As we can see just over the country, the whole racial climate is different in the United States. And I think it's just a microcosm of that at the university.
Let me ask this, because Jason Whitlock is a syndicated columnist. He's an African-American columnist who wrote something about this, and he talked about this. He does sports quite more than anything else. And he says adult professors who should be educating kids on the continuing danger of institutional racism instead built a human shield around a tent city to host the starvation of an N-word fighter disguised as a freedom fighter. He's saying here that you don't worry about the rednecks throwing out N-words here. You worry about and try to get deeper into really what's happening here. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think you can do both things. You can protect your students as well as enlighten them and educate them on some of the dangers of reality in the real world. And it sounds like that's what they were doing there.
Joy, let me get to you here, because there are those who, quite frankly, are saying that, and again, this is spreading to other colleges. Ithaca College now has people, 1,000 Ithaca students there walk out to protest racism. And it makes people wonder, why is this happening all of a sudden? Why is it happening in one big run here? Some people are saying maybe the kids are just whining a little too much. And we've had even some people come out in print and say, wait a minute, the parents didn't get these kids ready, so stop them whining and go ahead and pay attention to what's important in life. Your side.
Sure. Well, I don't think it's fair to say any one thing, right? There's obviously a lot of things that are going into cultural conflicts like this. And you're right, we're seeing a lot more of these, and it kind of frightens people because they think of campuses as protected places. So I've recently written about one affair that I think people should be talking about, and it's what I call the absent mother problem. And so, you know, we've all heard about the absent father problem, and we know that the psychological, the social research on that is very strong. That shows that kids are, you know, insecure, they're angry, they act out when they don't have fathers in the home. But there's also a lot of research that shows what happens to young people when they don't have a mother in their life, especially during the crucial first 3 years of their lives. And what it basically does is creates this sort of environment in their mind where they react instead of think about things. They don't feel safe, they don't feel comfortable, they don't feel loved. And that really has repercussions for the rest of their life, as we're seeing. So I think family is something that really needs to be talked about. If we are seeing a lot of young people that are angry, that are feeling threatened, that aren't able to, you know, what they call in psychological literature, be resilient, to look in, even a small adverse item like somebody calling you a name, if you can't respond to that like an adult, there's obviously something going wrong there.
Dr. Falconer, what about that? There are those who say, as Joy said, be tougher. These kids, everybody is complaining about, I'm offended by this, I'm offended by this word, I'm offended by this action, that maybe it's time to just stop doing that, stop being so offended, and man up and woman up, if you will. What do you think?
Well, in my opinion, of course, growing up as being an African-American student on a predominantly white campus, I would actually say something quite the opposite. I would say African-American students are the most resilient students you will find probably in the country, because of what they have to endure on a daily basis as far as racial microaggressions, looks, sneers, and a feeling of knowing that you don't belong is much more than what most students would ever have to deal with, or more than what most students would be able to deal with. So they're very resilient. They've gotten to the point where they have gain interest into the university and they are in a community and they expect that community to keep them safe. So
Okay.
I don't see it as a matter of whining at all.
Joy, let me get back to you on that because Dr. Falconer makes great points. The African-American community has been put upon by decades here. This is not just something that's immediately happening here. This has been going on for a long time. So aren't they then, instead of whining, aren't they putting forward something that needs to get out there?
Well, I mean, nobody, I think, is going to disagree that, there are real reasons, that some real grievances that could be aired and discussed. But if you look at the trajectory of history with greater access to the, community life for African American people, greater entrance into universities, greater impact in the business community, and so forth. So it's been decades and decades that we've been having greater integration. So why now in 2015 are we suddenly seeing people lose their minds when only conditions have been technically getting better? You didn't see this as much back in the 1950s and the 1940s when conditions were objectively a lot worse. So I think there's other things that we have to be talking about here in terms of, yes, so maybe someone is being rude to you, they're giving you looks, but what happens when someone gives you a dirty look? Do you sit there and go riot? I don't think that's the appropriate response.
Well, and to be fair, nobody's rioted here. That is the point. This was a very peaceful protest, at least. We're all out of time. I want to have you both back again because
another aggressive behavior.
Right, we have to continue talking about this. Is very important here. Real grievances, I think, is what we're down to here. Making sure that no matter your color, your skin, who you are, making sure that the real grievances are talked about and they are addressed on an everyday basis. I think that's important. Joy Pullmann, Dr. Jameca Falconer, I want to thank you both for being here. We will be back to do this again. Now, here's something else being taken overboard. The attack on what few honest journalists remain in our midst. Next on The Hardline.